I know what I am in truth. I know how I serve in truth. I am here, I am here, I am here. I know who you are in truth. I know what you are in truth. I know how you serve in truth. You are here, you are here, you are here. We know who we are in truth. We know what we are in truth. We know how we serve in truth. We are free. We are free. We are free. Greetings and welcome to the Vital Aesthetic. I'm your host, James Freeman, also known as Bagheera the Man. My intentions in creating the Vital Aesthetic was to help empower my audience to get clear about who they are and what they want, to live the way that they truly intend. The Vital Aesthetic is the latest branch of my tree of service that I have created over the years. It began with my books. Then I started making videos and coaching. After coaching for a little while and working on my latest book, I felt it was important for me to prioritize optimizing my health. I had done a lot of work to clean up my body, but I just wanted to get a little bit more clarity about what I actually wanted in my life. I began to build this tree of service out of a feeling of necessity, and I needed to take some time to consider why I was actually doing what I was doing. So after I had cleaned myself up a bit, I turned my focus to creating my first music album. It's something that I had wanted to do for most of my life, and I finally felt as though I was coherent enough to do that. So that was just published last month or earlier this month, very recently. And around the same time, I started this podcast. In episode 1, I provided an overview of the Vital Aesthetic and my entire body of work. I laid out my basic philosophy and some of the ways that that philosophy has empowered me and my clients. In the second episode, I tell the story of my journey so far in this life to provide context for my current work, as well as offer insights about how I created the challenges in my life, how they affected my path, and how the overcoming of those challenges brought me to clarity about who I am, what I truly desire, and the purpose I had in embodying as this man. My hope is that by sharing my story, you and others can find solidarity with me if you've faced similar challenges. And I also hope that the insights I share may help others to navigate their challenges with a greater holistic perspective and more wisdom than I had back when I was in the midst of those challenges. Essentially, I remember feeling like I could really use some help back when I was struggling. And my hope is that people who might be struggling will find my podcast and benefit from what I have to share. In the premium segment of this episode, available on Patreon, I provide a detailed overview and discussion on how I solved each of my problems. So without further ado, let's get started. Episode 2, How I Got Here. Before I was born, I formed desires, a life in form, and the expression of my divine qualities, peace, love, prosperity, care, and beauty, through that life, through that form. I contemplated the form, his gifts, his body, and his psyche, and then I found my mother and father, and together we agreed to bring this man to life. And so it was. Womb time to born day. Following conception, as a zygote, I began to multiply my template, rapidly forming more cells. With zeal and delight, I organized those cells into tissues, and these into organs. As my tactile and olfactory senses came online, this realm, nestled in the cosmic field, began to enter my awareness from the new lens I had created. I could see, though my physical eyes had not yet opened. The delicate fibers of my nerves received incomprehensible complexity in the form of subtle vibrations from my mother's womb, her heart, and the environment where she lived. Carefully, I grew my body in the safety of the womb. Then, the time came for me to emerge. Immediately upon my first breath of air, overwhelmed by the intensity of my experience, I inhibited the functioning of my olfactory senses, as most, if not all, humans do, so that the amount of information that I was receiving was proportional to my ability to process it. I'm not going to go into the trauma of birth in a hospital here, maybe in a later episode. I feel like a lot of people can relate to that being a sensitive topic. I don't feel any reservations about talking about it. It's just such a can of worms that I don't. That would take up the whole episode if we started to unpack that. The medical violence left me shocked and desperate for comfort, which I hungrily received from my mother, though I, like many of you, still hungered for more. Like many of your own mothers, my mother's capacity to care for me was, in some ways, limited by the paradigm in which she lived, as well as her beliefs and the circumstances which had arisen from them. I don't blame my mother for my experience, nor the challenges I faced in infancy. I've come to acknowledge and respect her efforts. She, like all mothers, did the best that she could with what she had. And I, like all of you, have done the same. Mystical childhood experiences. In my early childhood, I was naturally inclined to be outside much of the time. We had a garden where we lived in California, and I recall many of my days in those early years exploring that garden. My sensitivity was such that I could hear the subtle vibrations of the earth and the creatures who dwell here. Intuitively, I would commune with the bugs, the birds, and the small mammals who lived in the trees and bushes. I was slowly being taught the ways of society and ushered away from my own divine nature. But part of me has always remained in communion with all life in the garden. Then around the age of 4, I began learning to suppress my true self. This is not a story of victimhood. Indeed, I did play the blame game during my adolescence and early adult years, but now I see the importance of these experiences, the understanding and the compassion that I've developed for so many of our people, the comprehension that I've developed of our collective predicament. My survival as a child appeared to depend upon me behaving as I was expected. So by the age of 4, I was beginning to mask and becoming quite adept at it. But the suppression of my authentic self was beginning to take its toll as disease began to manifest in my body. And I don't think that it was just the suppression of the true self that resulted in disease manifesting in my body. That was a major part of it, I think, but another significant contributing factor is the beliefs that were inculcated in me in my early childhood. It's been demonstrated to me beyond the shadow of a doubt through my direct experience that our beliefs inform our experience, and the capacity that we have to create and what we are capable of seems to be limited only by our beliefs. Now, that is a controversial take, perhaps, but I have witnessed miraculous things in total sobriety, things that could be called impossible. And these were not one-off occurrences. These kinds of miraculous happenings have occurred numerous times throughout my life. I can't chalk those up to hallucination or imagination. Our beliefs seem to be the only limiting factor in what is possible. And so in regards to health and how health expresses in the body, it seems very clear to me at this point that the illness that I experienced in my early childhood seemed to have a lot to do with my beliefs, the beliefs that I had been given, the beliefs that I had accepted. As this indoctrination was taking place, I would still find solace in solitude. In my time alone, outside and in my room, I would take off the mask and dwell in my awareness of who I truly am. I made a promise to myself that no matter what happened, that I would never forget who I am, never lose touch with my true nature. I vowed this before entering public school. Make no mistake, some people thrive there, but I did not. That was where I broke my promise and began to lock the true self away for fear of what would happen if I did not behave as I was told to. And so it began. The program was inserted, and there was no room for the true self to fit in the box which I was allowed. My pretending steadily became replaced by a suppression so effective that I slowly forgot the mask I wore for my parents, teachers, peers, and other people who I perceived as authority figures was just a mask. But I started to believe it was me. For several years, I accepted the program at the cost of my authentic self. I was becoming unconscious, falling asleep, as they say. And then the pain became too much for me to ignore, so, like many of you, I developed methods of coping. This is how it started. Fantasy books and macaroni and cheese. Escapism and numbing. It looks so innocuous, but perhaps that's just because it's so common. For me, this was how I started learning to manage my pain. by avoiding my direct life experiences and numbing myself to the feelings that arose in me in response to my life. Maybe you have or had similar methods. This worked well for a while, but I was elated when I discovered video games. Now, don't misunderstand me. I am not remonstrating against video games. I recognize the value of video games, but where I ran into problems in my youth was that I came to believe that the video games were the only place where I could have experiences that were satisfying to me. Because the experiences that I wanted to have in my physical experience didn't seem feasible to me. In fact, when I would talk about my dreams with people, the word impossible came up, and I took that belief on at a pretty young age. So I had already decided that my dreams were not logistically possible or realistic based on the framework provided by my education in sociocultural dogma. So when I discovered video games, it was a game changer. It's a paradigm shift. I didn't realize it at the time, but the reason that fantasy books really did it for me is because the heroes were true to themselves, and I had been suppressing myself for years at that point. The characters in these stories had definiteness of purpose. They knew who they are, and they lived that authenticity. In story-based role-playing games, I could live vicariously through these characters who knew their purpose and actively engaged in their quest. Things that I was denying myself through my limiting beliefs. So when I found video games, I found relief. But because I was continuing to suppress the true self and deny the intentions of the true self, the experiences that I truly desired, I started to, eschew my real life, my physical experience in favor of video games. So pretty soon after I gained access to video games, I started looking like this. I'm not saying anything's wrong with that look. If that's your style, more power to you. But I looked like that because because I was neglecting my body. So some years after I began to immerse myself in virtual environments, I discovered tobacco. And a little while after that, I discovered cannabis. And when I found each of these, I experienced relief again, like another tier of relief, because like video games, tobacco and cannabis allowed me to think and feel in a broader capacity than I had been programmed to. Tobacco and cannabis each helped to alleviate the tension in my body that was resulting from my limiting beliefs. And so with that assistance, then that relief that I felt translated to a more open state of mind, and I felt like I was more readily able to access thoughts and imagine more of what I actually wanted, and have more of a psychosomatic experience that was that was aligned with what I actually wanted. Because at the time when I wasn't using tobacco and cannabis, I didn't feel like I even had access to the parts of my imagination where I could feel close to my dreams. So the problem with that, though, is that because I still was holding on to these limiting beliefs, because I still believed my dreams were impossible, I was just treating the symptoms. I wasn't addressing the root cause of the problem. And when I found alcohol, this trend continued. My anger, sadness, and frustration that I had suppressed for what was then most of my life began to bubble up and spill over. I didn't have an outlet, so I just tamped it down with more numbing and escapism. My creative expression, which had been present and active in my early childhood, was gradually suffocated by the limiting beliefs I had accepted and the apathy which had become my disposition. By 16, I was in so much pain I couldn't bear it, and I began to study intensely, searching for reprieve in philosophy, science, economics, and the like. And it was in those studies that I thought I had found some firm footing, some solid ground to stand on. But I was essentially indoctrinated into hard materialism, scientism, and I felt this sort of false confidence. I would take a position like, oh well, there's lots of studies to back up these ideas, but the underlying implications and the fundamental core beliefs of this ideology are a complete lack of consciousness. So that gap in my comprehension led me to the New Age movement. And once again, I was drawn into a religion, this time by the allure of comfort. Like many of you, I studied a lot, and I grabbed onto every idea that felt like it could get me out of my misery. But I hadn't yet had a mystical experience, not since childhood. But as I began to learn about plant medicine, I read reports from people who were describing these transcendental experiences they were having. And I think that the reason I didn't investigate any kind of spiritual discipline or practice was because I was so averse to work. I had come to detest effort, because in my youth I felt as though my public education was something that was being imposed upon me and not something that I was willingly choosing to do. That's why I eventually dropped out, got my GED, and started working instead. But my point is that I didn't even take meditation seriously. I didn't even consider that a viable realm to investigate because I was so averse to effort of any kind. So when I discovered plant medicine, it didn't look like that. But it did completely dissolve my attachment to all the beliefs that I had accumulated about the nature of reality, who we are, and what we're doing here. So that led to this period of breaking down old ideas and replacing them with rhetoric from many different sources. Some of them spurious and others downright preposterous. But there were some gems that I have kept. The rest of it was a lot of junk. And, maybe certain stuff works for you that didn't work for me. That's a distinct possibility. If you've been studying various esoterica and you've found some, obscure grimoire full of spells that really did it for you, then more power to you. In regards to psychedelics, though, the most important thing that psychedelics brought me was a reminder of who I am. I remembered my early childhood when I was still present in my knowing before I started to accept all of these limiting beliefs. So psychedelics reminded me of the little boy in the garden who heard and listened to the song of the true self. However, at the same time, I was learning independence and the common ideas about how money works and what people have to do for their survival, allegedly. These were very firmly reverberated by my fellows. So a great contrast arose between what I was finding in my studies and what other people believed. In fear of being ostracized, I relegated discussion of my esoteric research to forums and did not dare mention them to my peers, nor try to put them into practice until later. But this schism began to form in me as I worked more with psychedelics. When I was in flow state, feeling wonder and joy, it was kind of like this. On the other hand, when I talked with my peers about their beliefs and studied various conspiracy theories to try and make sense of why our socio-political situation is what it is, my subsequent trips were more like this. So I returned to my coping mechanisms, and that seemed to work for a little while. But then, one night, the true self appeared and said, I'm paraphrasing, "Listen, it's time to wake up. This delusion is not going to work anymore. You're going to be brought face to face with all that you've created in fear. And through that process, you will be made new." And my arrogant response basically went like this. A helping hand was extended to me, and I refused it because I thought that I knew better. I think, again, it came back to this aversion to effort of any kind, in any form. So I was offered help, and I turned it down. And even though I was given this glimpse of what was going on and where I was headed, I decided to keep heading in that direction anyway, because I was so attached to my coping mechanisms that I was terrified of the discomfort that I might experience if I were to let them go. So I tried to go back to business as usual, which was lying to myself and everyone else and numbing myself and avoiding responsibility. And things at home started to look a little bit like this. And then this. I'm realizing that if you're listening to this on Spotify or any other podcast streaming platform, that you're not able to see the images. Essentially, what happened was that my true self confronted the small self and said, like, yo, you need to get your shit together because you're heading towards disastrous critical mass event. And I was like, no, this is fine. It's fine. I'm just going to keep like fucking off and not doing anything really truly satisfying with my life. Like, the numbing and the escapism is totally adequate. I'm just going to keep that going for a while. And what happened was that my attachment to that, in light of the clarity that was unveiling itself to me, meant that I couldn't handle being responsible. And so my life fell apart. And I ended up living in my car for a total of about 2 years over the course of like a 3-year period. And during that time, I was really struggling. I felt like I couldn't talk to anybody about what I was going through. I would get on internet forums and I would, find some other people who had been through similar experiences. But as far as real life, flesh and blood, another person, like in real life, I could see with my own eyeballs and talk to. I just didn't really feel like I had anybody along those lines that could really help me. I mean, I did have a good friend who, still a good friend, who was very, very helpful and supportive. But what I was struggling with was existential. I mean, it was really intense internal reckoning going on. So I spent a lot of time in isolation, feeling very, very alone. But at a certain point, I started to get used to that because I was coming to some clarity about who I am and who I've always been. And the ideas that I had accumulated and become so attached to had really deeply integrated I was finding so much of that was false. It was not authentic to me. It was just the way that I had trained myself to be, because I was afraid of being myself. I was true to myself in my early youth, but essentially, like, the reception was not satisfactory. So I just started being the way that I thought that I was supposed to. I believed that it was essential to my survival for me to pretend to be somebody else. But that happened, that was reinforced for such a long period of time that it wasn't until my life fell apart and I spent a bunch of time isolated that I came to more clarity about who I actually am, and was able to, chunk off these layers and layers of delusion that I had accumulated. About 2 years I spent in and out of homelessness over a 3-year span of time, during which I was mostly isolated. I lost everything that mattered to me, but I found myself again at rock bottom. And you know what they say about rock bottom. From there, the only way to go is up. And at this point, I was starting to let go. I mean, really let go. And if I didn't have someone who depended on me, I don't know that I would have stayed here. I mean, I'm always here, so there's that. Like, where else would I go? But as far as being attached to this form, my attachment to this man was loosened significantly. But in my isolation, when I hit rock bottom, it became very, very clear to me that I still have work to do. That work, I don't feel like it's a job so much. I feel like what it actually is the desires that I had when I decided to embody here. And if I were to let go of this man, then the desires that precipitated this man's existence would still be present. I would still have those desires. So, like, even if this man were to perish, the desires that had not yet been realized, had not been satisfied, those desires would remain. And then I would go through all the trouble of incarnating again to give it another go. So it became very clear to me that the life I wanted would not be handed to me by some kind of external savior, and the world was not going to change its tune to suit my opinions and preferences. So if I wanted to get somewhere, I had to decide where and move in that direction of my own accord. So I started learning how to do that. And this is where I began to develop coherence, because I started to get clear with myself about what I actually wanted. I made my way to stability by focusing on the fact that my thoughts and emotions are the cause of my behavior, and my behavior has a lot to do with the circumstances of my life. I began to immerse my attention in learning how successful people think. And I know successful, like, what does that mean, right? I would say that success is really simply just people who know who they are and know what they want. Granted, in the whole success consciousness genre, there's plenty of people who maybe don't know who they are, maybe aren't clear on what they want, but that seems to me to be what real success is. So as I started to integrate a lot of the material that I was reading from that whole genre, I came pretty quickly to the recognition that I had been sabotaging myself with limiting beliefs my whole life. And as I eliminated those beliefs, the quality of my thoughts, emotions, and behaviors improved. And so too did my quality of life. And that is how I began to heal, by beginning to dissolve limiting beliefs. That and fruit. I'm not going to open that can of worms right now, but essentially, and I don't feel dogmatic or ideological about this as much as I used to. Diet's a sensitive topic, and you know, if your body's asking for something, it's important to take care of your body. But when I started to pump the brakes on all the junk food that I was eating, all the really highly processed crap that I was putting in my body, and started to eat real food, whole foods, and most importantly, fruit, and started to learn about why living food is important. And my relationship with food changed dramatically, and with that change in my relationship with food came drastic changes in every other area of my life. So again, I'm not in the camp that everybody should just only eat fruit. I don't feel like that's a helpful message. But if you eat a lot of processed food, I encourage you to investigate what it's like to have a smoothie, have a salad sometimes. Eat fruit, eat whole foods. You know, simple lists of ingredients. You know, whole foods. There's a world of difference between eating some grapes straight off the vine and eating a cheeseburger and fries. It's a world of difference. The way that the body responds to real food is very, very powerful. And when I started to learn about why fruit is important and started to develop a more intimate relationship with fruit, it radically changed my life. And that's all I'm going to say about that right now. So I started making changes. As I began to dissolve the limiting beliefs that I held, there was space. I made changes, and this would not have, this making changes is not something that felt feasible to me until I had hit rock bottom. And as much as I don't want that for anybody, I think for some of us, it's an important part of the process. Because if we're holding on to something just because we're absolutely terrified of letting go, then it's such grace to experience a situation where your only viable option is to let go. You learn that you can. So I started to make changes, and that was slow at first. But those changes began to happen more quickly as my body began to heal, as my psyche began to heal. And over time I developed strength and discernment. Whereas before, when I was full of these limiting beliefs, when I was very tightly gripping my coping mechanisms, I was weak. I experienced weakness. I identified with weakness, and I had very little discernment. I was operating unconsciously for the most part. So after a few years of focusing consistently on healing and learning to attend to my responsibilities, I was able to organize my thoughts coherently enough to put together this podcast, which I intend to continue creating for the rest of my life. As I dissolved limiting beliefs by sorting out my psyche, my body healed and my life improved. When I got coherent about my true desires, I started helping people, making videos, writing books, and just earlier this month, I published my first music album. And now we've got this podcast. I've recently begun to transition from consulting to coaching, and I'm in the middle of setting up a website for that. I will post a link in the description once that is set up. I'm offering 20-minute introductory calls for new clients. I hope that my story is valuable to you. I'm grateful to share it so that others may benefit. For anyone interested in the premium segment of this episode, I'll see you over at Patreon. Thank you for being. Thank you for your presence. Blessings. I am delighted to be here with you. I know you feel my love. That's all I really gotta say. Though I know our minds hunger in language, so I'll find some words anyway. Before you were born, you chose this journey to forget who you are. And through these trials, learning, remembering, child of the stars. And all along we've been here with you, inside of your heart. Take respite in knowing that your search ends now. forget anymore. This is how you do. I feel. Eternal, though you've known yourself through form. These are expressions made by your divine impressions, powerful, present, and warm. Take respite in knowing that your search ends now, not soon. You need not forget it. I know who I am in truth. I know what I am in truth. I know how I serve in truth. I am here, I am here, I am here. I know who you are in truth. I know what you are in truth. I know how you serve in truth. You are here, you are here, you are here. We know who we are in truth. We know what we are in truth. We know how we serve in truth. We are free. We are free. We are free. Welcome to the premium segment of the Vital Aesthetic Podcast, episode 2. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your support. Let's get into it. I'm going to briefly list my problems as they were when I hit rock bottom. I'll go over each of them individually, explain the limiting beliefs that were underlying those problems, and how I solved them by dissolving the limiting beliefs. My problems when I hit rock bottom were I was homeless, I was struggling to pay my expenses, and I was numbing myself and avoiding my life. Being homeless for me was very painful, as it is for many people. But there were a lot of intense psychological changes that took place, which were helpful to me ultimately, because they broke down many of the ideas about myself, which I had come to believe. And those were really the root cause of my situation at the time. Believing I didn't deserve the comfort and luxury of a home was paired with beliefs that I was a bad person who should feel guilt and shame and be punished for his behavior. I also believed at the time that in order to get our needs met, we have to do things that we don't want to do. And that one took quite a while to release. Even after I got out of homelessness, I held on to that belief for a long time. But the feelings of unworthiness, shame, and guilt were the very first thing that I had to let go of. Back when I was initially experiencing homelessness, whenever I tried to imagine a better situation for myself, my imagination was blocked by my belief that I wasn't worthy of a better situation. So I would try to imagine myself in a home, and I literally couldn't do it. A version of me from some months before, in the wreckage of my relationship with my daughter's mother, had started punishing himself through all sorts of self flagellation, with homelessness at the center. So I approached this part of my psyche and began to negotiate with it. I asked him, "Why do you believe all these things?" And he said, "I did bad things. I lied. I was selfish. I didn't do what everyone wanted me to do. So I deserve to be punished. And when I've been punished enough, then I'll be worthy of redemption." I wasn't really shocked by this. I had been looking around in my outward experience to find a solution, yet I intuitively sensed that the source of the problem was not out there somewhere, but within me. I think intuitively we all know that our limiting beliefs are the cause of all our problems. But because we form them through pain, often in early childhood, they're usually just very firmly established, not just in our psyche, but in our body. So the ones that I just mentioned were from only a few months before I lost my home. But I found out later that those beliefs were preceded by, rooted in similar beliefs that had been established way back when I was in elementary school. So I told this part of my psyche, "Listen, man, you are not inherently bad. You know why you did the things you did. You never meant anyone any harm. And even if you had terrible reasons and did intend harm, everyone is worthy of redemption. People who have done far more heinous things have claimed redemption. You can too. But punishing yourself right now is not helping anyone. The shame and guilt and unworthiness are all just ideas that are not helpful and are fundamentally not true. Not only that, but these beliefs are actually harmful to you and to others. Because if you're judging yourself like this, you are denying the innate value of your life, which inhibits the expression of your gifts, the service and benefit that you would naturally be sharing with the world if you weren't blocking that with these limiting beliefs. You're okay. You're safe. You can let those beliefs go. And we did. But as I said, those ideas were predicated on beliefs that I had initially established back in my early youth. So I later approached this part of my psyche, this 6-year-old me, and said, "Hey, bud, why are you doing this to yourself?" And he said, "When I talk the way that I want to, people tell me to be quiet. They don't want to hear what I think and feel. They just want me to be how they want me to. I get in trouble at home and school when I say what I think and feel, so I must be bad. I deserve to be in trouble, and the timeouts are helping me to get better because there's something wrong with me that needs to be fixed." That shook me up a bit to hear that. I could feel very intensely the parts of my body that had been holding these beliefs for most of my life. So I went through some stuff as I processed what this 6-year-old version of me was saying. Some big emotions. But I told him, "There is nothing wrong with you. That stuff happened at school and at home because your teachers and your parents had their own ideas about what is okay that didn't include all of your wonderful dreams. What they did and said had nothing to do with you, has no impact on your worth, and in no way diminishes the wholeness that you are. The things you think and feel are important, they matter. You are safe. Your dreams are valid. The beliefs you hold about needing to be punished and something being wrong with you are not true. You can let them go. So he did. He was really happy to let go of those. And I brought him where he wanted to go, gave him what he needed, feeling that he was safe enough to express authentically. Once I had rooted out the belief that was behind my situation, everything started to improve. I found a home and was developing a much healthier relationship with myself. Supportive, encouraging language replaced negative self talk. I was becoming my own best friend, giving myself the love and care that I had been withholding because of the limiting beliefs I was holding on to. But I was still struggling to pay my expenses. And while the root cause of this problem was only addressed very recently, I ameliorated the struggle back then by addressing the cause of my numbing and escapism. There were several parts of my psyche holding the beliefs that numbing and escapism were coming from. The first was 7-year-old me, who had concluded that his dreams were not realistic, logistically feasible, and so, in essence, were impossible. And because of this, he felt that he could, by reading fantasy books, satisfy his hunger for experiences beyond what most would call realistic, experiences that were closer to the experiences that he desired, his dreams. So I told him about my mystical experiences and that I had seen firsthand that absolutely anything is possible. And so he let go of those limiting beliefs, and I gave him permission to follow his dreams. But the numbing and escapism continued. So upon investigation, I found that, again, at 12, I had reinforced the idea that my dreams weren't possible. Then again at 16, 18, and 20. When I dropped out of high school at 16, when I started working full time at 18, and at 20, when I was fully indoctrinated into scientism and agreed that there was no such thing as spirit except as an idea people used to cope with the reality of a cold, indifferent universe. I don't believe that stuff anymore, just for total clarity. So I confronted all of these parts of myself from 16, 18, and 20 and reassured them that our dreams are valid. We don't need to run away from life. We can bring our dreams forward. And to do that, the numbing and the escapism has to taper off. So the limiting belief was dropped. And for several years, I've been tapering away from numbing and escapism. I don't actively engage with any numbing or escapism now. It's been over a year since I drank alcohol. I rarely consume any kind of entertainment. My diet's not perfect as I idealize it to be. But I no longer use food to numb myself. I eat to live, not live to eat. It's been over a month since the last time I smoked cannabis. And even before that, my relationship with cannabis was healthy, I would say. Um, and while I've been smoking a little bit of tobacco, like 1 to 3 cigarettes a day, sometimes none, it's organic tobacco that I roll myself. I have a very intimate relationship with it. And that relationship is much different than it used to be. There's no dependency going on there. And same with cannabis when I was still working with cannabis. Cannabis and tobacco, I acknowledge and respect that these are medicines and meant to be worked with as such. with that level of respect. So I guess the main point that I'd like you to take away from this is that regardless of the limiting beliefs that we might hold, we absolutely have the power to make changes in our life. And that starts by acknowledging the truth that change is not only possible, it is inevitable. There is nothing static in this world. We can absolutely make changes in our lives, and that starts by being willing to let go of our limiting beliefs. Because if you know what you want and can stay focused on it with no interference, you will realize it in your physical experience. Limiting beliefs are the greatest interference that any of us deal with, bar none. Other obstacles are puny by comparison. I looked around at my life at rock bottom, saw my lack of housing, lack of money, and lack of people who cared about me as the obstacles. But they were just reflections of the true obstacles within my own limiting beliefs. So the last problem that I had was struggling to pay my expenses on time. And this was because I believed what many, many people believe. You might even still believe this yourself, that money is something that comes from somewhere outside of you. And in order to get it, you have to do something. I really had to dig around for a while to root out where that idea was coming from. It had started around 12 and was reinforced many times over, especially as I started working, because nearly all of the people in my life believed this. And the idea was pervasive in the media that I was consuming and in so much of our culture and social uh, like the socio-cultural landscape that we find ourselves in. This idea that money is something that we have to get by doing something is totally pervasive. It's everywhere. And so by the time I was 12, this idea really started to take hold, and that idea was continuously reinforced, especially after I started working. And I didn't have any evidence that that belief wasn't true. So I accepted that belief for years. But at rock bottom, at the lowest point in my life, I had experiences where even during times when I wasn't working and had no money, and as far as I could tell, wasn't doing anything to help anyone with anything in any capacity, my needs were still met. So when I came to recognize that that limiting belief was the root cause of my experience of scarcity, of poverty, I let it go. I've come to know the truth that our needs are always met in perfect ways. And we can experience this truth fully when we're not blocking it with limiting beliefs, because we can have the experience of poverty, of lack, if we are insisting that that be our experience, if we're believing that that is true. Okay. Here's how to solve all your problems. Write down everything that you truly desire. Doesn't matter how silly it seems. If you struggle to articulate your desires, list your biggest fears or what causes you the most pain. It's likely that your true desires are the opposite of your biggest fears or the opposite of what causes you the most pain. You don't need the list to be perfect right away because you're going to whittle it down and you can always revise it later. So if some of those desires can be grouped in with another desire, such as I desire financial abundance and I desire safety, those can be unified. I desire security in the form of abundance. And when I imagine this, I feel safe. The idea is to distill your list until you've narrowed it down to like 1, 2, or 3, max 4 desires. That's not an arbitrary number. Any more than 4, and you've just got too many different things to focus on. What is required for things to manifest is that enough attention must be given to them for them to accrue enough energy to crystallize into the physical realm. So for you to focus on your desires enough for them to manifest, it helps to simplify them so that you're staying focused. If you have too many different targets, you're not likely to focus on any of them long enough to get good results. Imagine you're flipping through the stations on a television at a rate of 3 channels a second, or 3 seconds a channel. If there's only 3 stations, you will be able to focus on each of them frequently enough to get an idea of what is happening on each of those 3 channels. But if you have 100 channels flying by at 3 seconds each, you will find it much more difficult to understand any of them than if there was only 3. So you whittle your list of desires down, and then you form that into a statement declaring that you experience what you desire in your imagination. For example, if you desire financial abundance, you could say, in my imagination, I am financially abundant. Money flows to me from many places, and I always have more than enough. By saying in my imagination, you're making the decree more acceptable to your mind. Because if you only have $2 in your physical experience and you say, I am financially abundant, the mind is probably going to say that is incorrect, false. But if you say in my imagination, the mind has no argument and you can experience abundance without interference. The feeling is the most important thing. The feeling which you can access through your imagination of the desired experience is what prompts the body to receive the vibrational frequencies of the experience. So you can actually express financial abundance first psychically, and then somatically. Even if you don't have a dime in your physical experience, you can experience abundance first in your imagination. And then when you focus on that enough, you will begin to experience that somatically. Your body will actually receive the feeling of that experience. And this is the key to realizing your dreams. You don't have to grind things out. You don't have to strive and eat a bunch of shit doing things you don't want to do to have the life you want. You just have to get coherent about what you want and be able to focus on it in your imagination without interference long enough for it to manifest in your physical experience. Now, notice I said without interference. And earlier I mentioned that limiting beliefs are the greatest interference any of us deal with. So that's why it's so critical to dissolve the limiting beliefs that we may be holding. You don't usually have to dig very deep to find them. You can just start imagining your true desires, experiencing them in your imagination. And if you hit a block, there's a limiting belief there. And you can ask, what am I believing right now? For me, I usually experienced limiting beliefs as concerning myself with how my dreams would manifest, like the actual logistics. And I found that this habit was based in a belief that I had to figure out by myself all the details about how to make my dreams happen, that was the only way that they could manifest. So I would get caught up in considering different courses of action I could take, but literally none of them were feasible, or they may have been feasible, but they required me to do a bunch of things that I didn't want to do, or work really hard, or both. And that was based in a belief that my dreams could only happen if I not only figured out all the details, but micromanaged every little logistical process along the way on my own power. And if I didn't, I would have failed. My dreams would be lost and I would be a disappointed loser. So it wasn't until I let go of those limiting beliefs that I was actually able to imagine the life I wanted to live. And once I was able to imagine the life that I wanted to live and focus on that without interference, that was when great changes began to actually unfold in my life. Those limiting beliefs were actually blocking my imagination. So if you start to imagine your desires and you find yourself blocked or unable to imagine because you feel like you have to figure out how you're going to make those things happen, it's a limiting belief. Find it, dissolve it, and get back to focusing on your dreams. If you know what you want and you focus on it long enough without interference, it will manifest in your physical experience. So before we wrap this up, I'd like to say that I know it can be difficult to examine our limiting beliefs, but I promise it's worth it. The relief you will feel when you let go of the ideas that are causing your suffering is such that your life will be forever changed. Imagine you had been in a room for as long as you could remember. Through the window, you could see other people, but you believed that the room was the only place where you could be. Now, imagine one day you discover that you can open the window, and soon after, discover that there is a door, which you had covered up years before. The room, which had been your experience, is revealed to only exist because your beliefs required that the room be there. When you release the beliefs, the room is still available to you, but eventually you stop returning to it because you have moved beyond it. That's it for this episode. Thank you again for your support. Thank you for being. Thank you for your presence. Blessings.